It is quite clear now that climate is linked to conflict. It acts as a multiplier and increases the threat of crisis and instability. There is, however, no robust and crucial localized evidence on the exact mechanisms through which climate can amplify conflicts.
How do we take our analytical information and convert it into a language which politicians understand? Because there is a disconnect between researchers, how they talk, and practitioners, how they talk, and politicians, how they talk. Can we have a common language?
We need to prioritize, we need to target, we have limited resources, so we really need strong support decisions tools in terms of understanding where we need to start working in terms of tackling this problem.
It's quite obvious that climate change has brought a new form of and frequency in drought and climate challenges, including floods and other forms of catastrophe around climate change. And these have direct relations with security.
Climate change is not just a security concern, it packs much more, and that needs to be the very foundation of making sound decisions. And what ECDPM has been trying to do is really to contribute to an understanding of what mechanisms and policies can be harnessed to strengthen climate resilience, and also how policies can be right-sized.
A key decision, of course, is to steadfastly remain committed to climate action at every level, but particularly at the national level. For the African Union Commission, pursuing multilateral cooperation is important to enhance the Commission's actions on climate security reporting, risk-informed planning, and response capacity.
Good day, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. It is a pleasure to be hosting today's seminar. In this panel discussion, we will look at climate security with the lens, of course, of Central America and Latin America. I am Bram. I'm the Director General for CIMMYT, the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. We're all proudly part of the CGIAR, and today moving towards an even more successful one CGIAR with more impact, more efficiency, and more resources. I want to say that we are all lucky today to have an outstanding panel of experts who will help us to understand the ongoing climate security crisis in Mexico and Central America, with an aim to put forward decisive, concrete actions to help address the converging challenges of climate change, food security, conflict, and forced migration. I would like to thank all of you, our many partners, farmer organizations, guests from donors, and other CGIAR organizations to this webinar. We will explore here together the climate security challenge in Latin America, the dry corridor extending from southern Mexico to Panama, including Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. This discussion could hardly be timelier, considering some of the latest reports that have been recently published by about the deteriorating food security conditions in Central America, which have even gotten worse by the extreme weather events, COVID-19, and alarming levels of crime-related violence. The United Nations estimates that the number of people requiring food assistance in Latin America almost tripled in 2020 due to the economic recession, and this associated with income losses caused by the COVID pandemic. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization and the Community of Latin American and the Caribbean States, the people most affected by hunger and malnutrition in Latin America and the Caribbean work in the informal economy and account for 50% of the labor force in the region. On top of that, the latest synthesis report from the United Nations Climate Change Task Force estimates that global green gas emissions will increase by 60% in 2030 as compared to the benchmark levels of 2010. This means something very simple. We're not on track for the Paris Agreement goals. We're not on track to be ready to reduce the degrees of Celsius that we need to reduce by the end of the century. We know that agri-food systems not only need to provide sufficient nutrition, they at the same time need to generate nature conservation and national security. Unfortunately, we have all seen the migration as part of the disruption of these precise agri-food systems. And these precise agri-food systems not providing all of the above. We have all seen how efficiency now needs to be turned into resilience. How in a way, today, we need to go back to our roots. We have received for our work the Nobel Peace Prize 50 years ago. And today, we need to go back to those roots to fast forward. Fast forward into a future where we connect agriculture for peace, where we put together our response capacity as a network of partners to make a difference. Because you all on the call know that climate security, that a climate secure world, that a world without conflict, that a world where agriculture creates peace will not be made from air-conditioned offices. It will not be made by people sitting and talking. It will be made by all of us turning things into action, data into information, information into decision-making, and in decision-making into decision-taking. I'm sure that Mark Leon Goldberg will moderate very soon this complex discussion, a discussion that counts with Andrew as a well-known special advisor for climate change of the UN, Deissy, well-known friend and leader of the Latin America Special Initiative for the CGIAR, Javier, who will represent the voice of the farmers and we will have to listen carefully, and Salvador as a good friend from the Mexican government. I am sure that all your insights on how to address the climate and food security crisis in the dry corridor of Mexico and Central America will be a complete eye-opener, and more than that, a call for action we will not be able to ignore and we will be held accountable for.
Muy buenos días, reciban un atento saludo a todos los participantes de este webinar. Gracias por su participación. Para el sector agropecuario es muy importante iniciar las discusiones sobre seguridad climática, principalmente en el corredor seco. Como sector tenemos el desafío de identificar estrategias integrales que nos permitan reactivar la economía, principalmente del área de los pequeños productores. Actividades como este webinar nos permiten conocer la información que los expertos desarrollan que nos permita llegar a ese objetivo. Desde la CLAC estamos comprometidos en facilitar este proceso con los actores claves del sistema, revisando y comentando documentos que se desarrollarán durante este proceso. Sin más, agradezco a los expositores que nos acompañan y promueven la discusión de seguridad climática.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Leon Goldberg. I am the editor of UN Dispatch and host of the Global Dispatches podcast. And today's conversation is being recorded as a live taping of the podcast. Bram Govaerts did a great job of framing this conversation, and I now have the honor of moderating an excellent panel today, whom I will now introduce. Javier Aliaga Lordman is Senior Climate Change Specialist for the Latin America and Caribbean Network of FairTrade Small Producers and Workers, which goes by the acronym CLAC. Welcome.
Welcome.
Deissy Martinez Barón is Regional Program Leader for CCFAS in Latin America with CGIAR. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Andrew Harper is Special Advisor on Climate Actions at the United Nations Refugee Agency. Welcome.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
And Salvador Fernández Rivera is Rural Development General Coordinator in the Ministry for Agriculture and Rural Development of Mexico. Welcome.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I have some questions prepared for our panelists, but I will also be sure to leave plenty of time for questions from the audience. To ask a question, please simply leave your question in the comment section wherever you are watching today's live stream. And today's conversation is also available in Spanish. Please click on the link in the event description and mute the video player to listen to the Spanish language translation. With that, let us begin. And Andrew, I am going to turn to you first. We've talked in previous panel discussions as part of this series how climate exacerbates insecurity, which can also lead to migration, both internationally and also within states. You are the Special Advisor on Climate Change for the UN Refugee Agency, so you must grapple with this issue nearly daily, I would imagine. In your experience, what is the role of climate in exacerbating insecurity, and how does this impact human mobility, specifically within Latin America and the dry corridor of Central America?
Okay, and thanks, Mark. And I'd just like to say how Bram introduced the whole session sums up a lot of the issues that we have to deal with. That climate change, the climate crisis, is being I wouldn't necessarily say a threat multiplier, but probably a vulnerability multiplier. And if you look at rather than climate being a threat or a security issue, but seeing as a person issue, a human issue, then it comes down to one of the key elements that climate is impacting the poorest, the most vulnerable communities first. And as a consequence, if you've got a community that is unable to adapt, who's already struggling, and we've already seen this, whether it be through the impact of the COVID crisis, or that is struggling because of just droughts or floods, or the inability to regroup after being hit by hurricanes or droughts, then they've often got no alternative but to move. And so what we have been seeing across the board, and this is particularly the case in the dry corridor as well as in the rest of Central America and South America, is that populations who would normally be able to resist the violence of climate change are basically being hammered year after year and have got no choice but to move. And as a consequence of that, there is an increasing competition over resources, and people are moving into areas where there's challenges with governance, and this is leading to violence. It may not necessarily be state-sponsored, or it's just leading to a breakdown into societies. And so as a consequence, this disruption which climate change is generating is leading to people looking for alternatives. And this is, let's say, exacerbating underlying other mega trends, which includes urbanization. People are moving for a whole host of reasons, and climate change is one of those key drivers. Over.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Deissy Martinez Barón now. CGIAR Climate Security is soon going to launch a report on the climate security nexus in the Central American Dry Corridor. Can you provide us with a preview on what the main findings of that report are?
Yes, thanks, Mark. Yes, this paper is aiming to understand the linkages between climate, conflict, agriculture, and migration in Central American Dry Corridor, and to offer a roadmap for the region while emphasizing on the role of research for development. So what we have found? We found that despite the interconnection between climate security and migration crisis, these are being managed totally as separate challenges in the Central American Dry Corridor. So that leave an opportunity for agricultural research for development to help rural populations to adapt and mitigate climate change impacts, as well as stabilizing agriculture-based livelihoods and increase peace and security through well-targeted support efforts with humanitarian, political, social, and security-focused solutions. We have also found that there are several entry points for climate security in this area. One of those is to foster interministerial and intersectoral dialogue on current silo perspective, for example, and so to quantify interrelated social, economic, and environmental challenges, and to find business cases to target public and private sector investment, including in research, and also building existing regional networks and transfer platforms to rethink and redesign community-based approaches. We think that those community-based approaches can be really effective to address these interrelated objectives. Also, to put human development, rural human development much higher in the agenda, I think that's key, and it's related to what just Andrew was mentioning, and strengthening and focus the agricultural research for development to transform the agricultural systems to be more resilient and productive. Those are the key entry points that we found in the report.
Thank you. Javier, you are the coordinator of the climate change program of the Farmers Union, CLAC. Can you summarize for us what your organization's main concerns are regarding climate security?
Okay, thank you. This is a very interesting and complex question because, well, there is a macroscopic vision that the main concern is migration, but I'm going to focus on the microscopic problems. In our perspective, the main concern is the income, because we are quite in touch with producers. We focus on income, and we understand that if we improve incomes, we will break a vicious circle of migration, and this will generate the opposite phenomenon. But we focus on, since we focus on income, we understand that there are at least 3 dimensions of analysis. The environmental dimension, which is very linked with natural resources scarcity, especially water. We also try to improve common pool resources problems, which are very common problem with producers. We also look to the economic dimension, especially price volatility and cost of production, and something very important, the appropriation and who generate value in the value of change and who appropriate that value. This is something that is really important. And of course, the agronomic dimension, which focus on crop yield. If we improve crop yield, if we manage price volatility, if we reduce cost of production, if we manage natural resources scarcity, of course, we will improve the income of producers. And with better incomes, we will reduce migration, and we will reduce all other causal phenomena like conflicts. So that is our main focus in this problem.
Thank you. I'd now like to turn to Salvador Fernández Rivera. The dry corridor is in your figurative backyard. Can you explain how the climate security nexus manifests itself in Mexico?
Yes, Mark. First, I would like to say that more than half of Mexico's territory is arid and semi-arid land. It's characterized by being both dry and warm. For this reason, Mexico is highly vulnerable to drought and wildfires. Mexico has also more than 9,300 kilometers of coastline, and this is along the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of California, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean Sea. This is an important resource, and it also makes Mexico highly vulnerable to hurricanes and floods, both in urban and rural areas. These risks result in food production losses, water scarcity, losses in forest land cover and biodiversity, and of course, in more people falling in poverty. Some beyond food, water, and environmental security, climate change has also an impact on other dimensions of security, as we are hearing today. And one of those dimensions is migration. Studies in Mexico point to a positive relationship between the increase in temperature and migration. Until early in this century, migration in Mexico was characterized mainly by large numbers of rural people moving to the USA in search of better job opportunities. However, and as we have heard today, presumably because of climate change, over the last 2 decades, migration in Mexico has become much more complex, as the country is in the path of migrants from Central America, the Caribbean, and even from countries in Africa and Asia that are on their way to the US. Some of these migrants are unable to cross the border between the US and Mexico and stay here in this country. We also know that migrants are very much abused by the organized crime, and this is a major threat to their personal security, and it's also a threat to national security in Mexico. That's what I will have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll continue with a next round of questions. Andrew, over to you. Unlike in Africa and Asia, displacement crises in Central America tend to be more short-term. From what you have learned from other regions, what needs to be done to mitigate the climate security threat in Central America, in the dry corridor in Central America, to avoid protracted crises like we see in other parts of the world?
Thanks, Mark. But that assumption may be changing quite quickly, and I think if we've just seen what's happened on the US border with the Haitians, as being almost symptomatic of what may be about to occur in the future, is that the overall environment facing many vulnerable groups throughout South and Central America is changing rapidly. And as I mentioned before, you had communities in the past who may have been able to resist or adapt due to one flood or one hurricane or one drought. But if you have this cascading series of disasters, they're finding it's not possible. And as a consequence, they are moving, and everyone moves internally first. But if there's not the support as far as adaptation and ability to build up that resilience, then what we are seeing is people continuing to move. And not only within the country, we're starting to see people move cross borders and then even further along to other countries. So what we're looking at, not only in Central and South America, but across the world, is what is the climate crisis going to be doing for vulnerable populations around the world. And there are very similar characteristics. And as Javier mentioned before, it basically goes down to the ability of communities to survive. And as was also mentioned by Bram before as well, many communities who are reliant upon agriculture are going to have to adapt. And the crops which exist at the current temperature threshold may not exist in 10 or 15 years' time. So we're going to have to change the way in which people manage the resources, because continuing on with the current way of living, of working, of farming is not going to be sustainable, unfortunately. So what we're doing is trying to work with key actors in order to look at where these regions will likely be as far as the impact of climate change, but not only the impact of climate change, what will the populations be in those areas, what will be the access to water in those areas, and then try and provide as much support as we can. We can't do this alone, and nor should we. We've got to be doing it in a very much holistic manner where development actors are working towards impact, we're working towards sustainable peace, and where we're using data to inform decision making. Often data is collected but not used in a manner which actually is of any use. So changing the way in which all agencies work to support the most vulnerable communities on the ground has to be the way in which we address climate change and security.
Thank you. And Deissy, to you, how can research help tackle climate security risks in the Central American Dry Corridor? What are some of the success stories you could share with the audience that helped farmers adapt to build climate resilience and helped to bring about peace at the same time?
Thanks, Mark. And I think that agricultural research can actually help to respond to the questions that Andrew was just mentioning. Using that data, using that information to really make decisions that provide means for communities to develop the capacity to adapt and to increase resilience. So investing in agriculture for research for development needs to be focused on enhancing resilience of agricultural production and rural livelihoods in response to climate change impacts, but that at the same time can also contribute to reducing conflict and out-migration. And in fact, in the position paper, we included 3 examples of 3 different cases in which we can show this. One was on participatory community-based adaptation, the climate smart village approach that the CGIAR research program on climate change, agriculture, and food security had been implementing over the last 10 years across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And the other one was related to the integrated agri-food system initiatives in Mexico and Colombia, led by CIMMYT and partners, which are clear examples of adaptive and transformative dimensions and resilience for resilience building in these 2 countries with relevant partners in order to reduce the impact of climate change and variability and increase productivity, as Javier was mentioning as well. And then the third one on climate services is to increase local resilience, so that we have these local technical agroclimatic committees, mesas técnicas agroclimáticas in Spanish, which are able to provide that information tailored at the local level, tailored to the needs of the farmers and the local stakeholders to really inform their decision making and reduce the risks associated to climate variability and climate change in their agricultural production systems. And this way, these local agroclimatic committees increase institutional adaptive capacity at different scales, influencing national and institutional policy changes, actually also fostering interinstitutional alliances that are key in order to address this complex problem, and then increase adaptive capacity and transformative resilience across different scales. So these are some of the examples that we have to show this how research for development is useful to address this complex problem.
And that leads very nicely into my next question to Javier. Farming cooperatives are far more prevalent and more highly organized in Latin America than pretty much anywhere else in the world. What role do you see cooperatives playing in rural areas to contribute to peace and security as well as climate resilience?
Okay, thank you. Well, in my previous intervention, I mentioned that we need to break a vicious circle. And let us think of one scenario with isolated producers and workers. And in this scenario, producers and workers has limited access to market, limited access to financing, and of course they have low production and high cost. And this is, of course, they will have a low income. And with low income, again, they will have limited access to financing and market. So this is a vicious circle when we talk about isolated workers. In the opposite side, in another scenario, we have association. We have associated farmers, and when farmers are associated, they have many benefits, but I will focus only in economies of the scale. And since they have more economies of scale, they are more able to break this vicious circle because they will access in a better way to financing and markets, and they will introduce and best practices and improve their productivity and reduce their costs, and they will increase their income. So association is a good way. In the case of the fair trade, we also have the premium price, and the premium price is like a price that we are able to accumulate over time, and this accumulate is like a leverage tool that also will give more opportunity to break this vicious circle.
Thank you. And Salvador, in regard to climate security-focused interventions, what are some of the lessons learned that Mexico can share with its dry corridor neighbors to the south?
Well, I think it is important first to put in context what is happening in the dry corridor. It is, as we have heard today, it is highly vulnerable to climate change. And in fact, the regional emissions of greenhouse gases are rather insignificant. Yet the impact of climate change in the dry corridor is immense. The insecurity that a few years ago was mostly contained within the northern triangle in the borders between El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala has expanded through the corridor, and very likely this has happened because of climate change. And I make reference to this situation because this is something similar that is happening also in Mexico. What lessons could we share? I think first will be very general lessons, but I think it's critical to have in place clear policies with goals that address both climate change and climate-related security issues. In Mexico's constitution establishes a mandate for sustainable development, also for environmental protection and for national security. We have a general law on climate change, and the country is part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. We have ratified both the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. And last year, we also updated our nationally determined contributions. Now, the situation on insecurity, I think it is more serious. We will talk about it a little bit today. But to implement this policy and to meet the national goals and international commitments, we have what we call a special program on climate change. This is a program that cuts across all sectors, and it is coordinated by the Ministry of the Environment and Natural Resources. The program goals include the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, also sustainable use of the natural resources, and adaptation to build resilience of people and the food system in general. In terms of resilience, what we are working on is basically on institutional and technical innovations to assist local governments and local communities to establish risk management strategies that include, in particular, early warning systems, also actions to anticipate and build preparedness to prevent the impact of droughts, floods, wildfires, sanitary risks, and to some extent also market failures. I think this is basically the experience that we have and that we feel is also closely related to what is happening in the dry corridor. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate your answer because these webinar series are all great conversations, but they also are intended to focus individual actions and institutional actions, what we can do to overcome some of these challenges. So with that in mind, my last set of questions to each of you will be action-oriented. Andrew, to you, the climate crisis is here now, and as you referenced earlier, will likely get worse. As you said earlier, the chances that different crops will need to be planted over the next few years are increasing. So going forward, what are UNHCR's big ticket actions to address climate security crises in Latin America and even beyond?
No, thanks again. I think everyone who is interested in the human dimension of the climate crisis has to refocus away from delivery. We still have to deliver support when it's required. We have to be more focused on the transformation aspect. What UNHCR is engaged mostly at the moment with people on the move, particularly from conflict-affected areas, violent-affected areas, is on the registration side, on providing protection. So been working with governments and communities to do that. But if that's the case, then it's almost too late. So we have to transform the way in which we work to try and reduce the reasons for why violence breaks out. So the big ticket items have to be talking to communities, listening to those communities and trying to understand what is it that they fear, and also how do they see ways in which to best address the impact of climate change and other issues coming forward. So in order to do that, we're working with governments, communities on the ground to develop regional plans of action, so that it's not just trying to react to events, it's trying to be much more proactive, anticipate where the trends are going. Science is very clear, data is very clear in regards to the challenges we're going to be having in the future. We need to recognize that and respond accordingly. The other elements too is we're participating in something called the Issue-Based Coalition on Climate Change. That's a regional platform of other UN agencies. Again, moving away from one agency knows everything to sort of saying we all need to be working together on this, and working with country initiatives as much as we can. In Brazil, there's a Green Jobs Initiative, which we're focused on. But wherever there is an initiative to support vulnerable communities, we'd be willing to try and provide support or be the catalyst to get resources to provide support, because the last thing which we want to do is see people more on the move due to that combination of conflict and climate. That is the last thing that demonstrates success. Over.
Thank you. And just a reminder to the audience, in a few minutes, we will be taking your questions. To leave a question, please simply write your question in the comment field wherever you are watching the live stream. Deissy, one CGIAR is launching a set of new initiatives in 2022 to help build resilience to climate change and contribute to peace and security. How will you do that in Latin America, and how has the evidence that has come out of the climate security debate helped shape your agenda?
Yeah, Mark, and that's one of the initiatives that we are developing together with Bram. We are co-designing a regional integrated initiative for Latin America that is called CLAC Resiliente. And the initiative is aiming to address in a holistic manner the interconnections between climate security and migration and agricultural research for development through a food systems approach. Our value proposition is that as innovation and research systems across scales are strengthened through collaborative actions on the ground, the agri-food systems will become more competitive, climate resilient, and sustainable for rural households that depend on those systems. This implies having a clear pathways for enabling adaptive and transformative resilience capacities and achieving scale while creating new opportunities for youth, men, and women that are informed by diverse and strong social networks. And here, I think that's the whole point of having these kind of initiatives is to join forces and to join efforts. And as Andrew was saying, this initiative is an opportunity to join efforts on how research for development can inform different initiatives and efforts that other institutions, development institutions, are pursuing in those territories. The initiative will implement the integrated agri-food system approach across 5 work packages, and those will focus one on climate and nutrition, the other one on digital agroclimatic advisory tools, on low emissions and competitive agroecosystems and value chains, and innovation and scaling through hubs for knowledge and co-creation of tailored and actionable science for policies, investments, and institutions. This last work package will mainstream climate security and migration interconnections across all the initiative, CLAC Resiliente, and we hope to join forces, as I mentioned, with different stakeholders, so that through this initiative, we are able to achieve those goals of increasing the resilience of vulnerable households, looking at those local networks, looking at those capacities and ownership of the research that we do, together with agencies that can scale those learnings, those information, and those insights from research beyond.
Thank you. And Javier, how will your organization help farmers address the climate risks and the climate crisis gets worse? How will you address the fact that climate weakens food systems, which can lead to insecurity and into conflict?
Yeah, okay. Well, first we develop a climate change strategy. For instance, it's a framework strategy, and the idea is to introduce technologies adapted to climate. The idea is to build resilience and diversify production. Yeah, and our strategy is focused on 5 strategic guidelines. The first one is planning, adaptation planning. The second one is better decision making. The third one is research, very in line with Deissy. The fourth is improve climate finance, what we call inclusive finance. And the last one is to promote joint mechanism. I mean, adaptation and mitigation mechanism. And this whole strategy implicitly will focus on reducing conflicts by improving incomes and improving the managing of natural resources, which are also very scarce. And this is our strategy, and we are achieving very good results. It's a 2-year strategy, and by the moment we work with near 200 organizations, and we plan to work with another 200 in the next year.
Thank you. And last question until we get to the audience questions for Salvador. In December 2020, your government, the Nobel Peace Center, and the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center called for agriculture for peace to, quote, overcome the main challenges to human development in an international system under pressure from conflict, organized crime, forced migration, and climate change. Which further steps is Mexico intending to take? And could Mexico contribute to sustainable change in the dry corridor?
Yes, Mark, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to environmental and food security issues, we are concerned by climate-related security. And this is in particular by security related to migration and how migrants are affected by the organized crime. And this is very much a problem here in Mexico as it is in the dry corridor and in other parts of the world. Here in Mexico, to deal specifically with this issue, a high-level commission was established over the last year, less than a year ago, to look at these issues. I've been participating in this commission. The commission first identified some regions, municipalities in the country that are affected by insecurity, by the presence of organized crime, and in urban and rural settings. And most of these regions are also under the effect of climate change. There is a set of pilot sites, and all of these are characterized by a large proportion of the population, farming population, that have a big rate to avoid insecurity. The big challenges that we have, first, one is how to restore the rule of law by pacific means. And a second challenge is how to facilitate the reconstruction of social processes. And of course, this goes well beyond to agriculture, but this is indeed an opportunity for agriculture to contribute to these processes. In all of these situations, what we have observed first is that the highest priority of the population is to restore the free and safe transit. That it seems that doesn't have to do much with agriculture. But for farmers also, what we have observed is that their top priority is not producing more, but their top priority, their first priority is their ability to take their products to the market and get the fair prices and not being abused by having to pay to the organized crime to have access to those markets. We don't have yet answers on how best to deal with these issues, but we are still working on it. Now, regarding the question of whether Mexico could contribute to sustainable change in the dry corridor, the answer is yes. In fact, Mexico's federal government is convinced and open to participate in this process, but is convinced of the importance of creating local capacity in the dry corridor by facilitating and investing in processes that integrate local communities to the economy in the context of sustainable food systems. This could be achieved by working under the framework of the Central America integration system. We heard this morning about the Consejo Agropecuario Centroamericano, and I think we will be very open in taking advantage of the opportunities to contribute to the peace process in the dry corridor. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now going to turn to questions from the audience. The first question I have is going to be for Javier and Deissy. It comes from Dick Tinsley. To what degree will improved farming systems require additional labor? And if so, do the farmers have the dietary energy to undertake this additional labor? Let's start with Deissy.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so one of the key things is to address holistically the whole improvement of farming systems. So you will have on one side, you can have biofortified cropping systems that will enhance the dietary and nutrition of the different farmers that are involved in this system. So you can combine different goals and different purposes when you are improving the farming systems. Some of those, the idea is to understand how much will labor increase and to what extent, and whether that balances the benefits that they are willing to receive. All the approaches and the research that we have done are based on a dialogue between the knowledge that the farmers and communities have and what we can offer as scientists and researchers. And the idea is to really understand what are the benefits of improving those farming systems, how we can do that better, and how innovation can support that. So the idea is to have a holistic and integral point of view and approach so that we understand what are the challenges and how we can meet nutrition benefits, but also more productive systems that also are in line with the different interconnections and relationships with the environment and natural resources that we need for those farming systems.
Thank you. Javier.
Well, I will start my answer with my main message, which is income. With low income producers, they don't have much money to buy food and have an adequate nutrition dietary. So based on our strategy, we are promoting the diversification of production. And with this diversification, producers from one side will be able to sell products and improve their income. The increase of income will improve the possibility to buy more foods, but also diversifying production, they will be able to eat better food with their own production. So the idea is, we understand the problem. This is a very common problem, and we are working very hard promoting tools to diversify production. And since we believe that this is the most adequate way, the most adequate tool to improve incomes and at the same time achieve dietary problems, we create a fund, and we are giving money to some producers based on some proposal to promote this diversifying of production.
Thank you. And the next question will be for Salvador and Andrew, and it comes from Benoit Manga. We know that that migration has an impact on economic development, but will improving the farming systems of migrant regions contribute to the global fight against climate change? Let's start with Salvador.
Yes. Well, I will start making reference to what Javier was saying about the importance of increasing income. And I do agree fully with that concept, because if the family has sufficient income for a living, they don't have incentives to join the organized crime. However, I think this hypothesis is valid in places where there is not much violence. If there is violence, this will not be enough, because in fact those producers will have a higher income. Then they become victim of the organized crime. I have to pay monthly fees for being in that place. So what we have seen in very violent places in Mexico is that they end up living. I think the security beyond what is the military related security, I think we need to address those problems. And I also agree with the concept of that innovations in agriculture will allow the farmers to have more income and make a sustainable use of their resources and improve their livelihoods in nutrition and so on. But we need to address the problems of insecurity. If we don't do that, that simply will not happen.
Thank you. Andrew, to you.
No, I'd also agree that it's not only climate change, which is one of the key drivers of people moving in these areas. It's also everything is interconnected, and one of the key elements is governance. If there is not strong governance, then it's hard to have impactful development programs. And so if you don't have a system which people can trust, then it doesn't matter what the investments are in the region, people will look to have a safe and secure future elsewhere. So you have a situation where climate change is exacerbating underlying grievances, and in some parts of South America and Central America, it's poor governance. And so unless you can deal with all these issues in a holistic manner, then you're going to achieve very little. And this is why it is so important that agencies, governments, and communities get together and actually identify why are people moving. And sometimes, even if you improve the farming potential of a certain area, there is a mega trend globally, which is towards urbanization. People are not willing to farm small plots if the return on that investment is not sufficient. They want to move forward. They want to see different opportunities for their children. So unless you address the issue of human dignity and security, then nothing else is really going to work.
So it is October 2021. Therefore, I feel rightfully compelled to pose a question to each of you about COP26 right around the corner, 1 month from now. Commitments from Latin American countries will be crucial to meeting the overall goals at COP26 and other important net zero targets. What message do each of you have to those attending COP so it brings about meaningful climate action, which also maintains peace and security? This will be our final round of questions. We'll take 1 minute each for the message that each of you have to those attending COP26 next month in Glasgow. And let's start with Salvador, because you brought up COP in your opening remarks as well.
Well, that's a tough question. No, I think it is not an easy one. Andrew referred to the importance of governance. I think that's true. That's an important issue. But I think probably because we don't know yet actually how to solve this problem of not having peace in some rural territories. We don't have a solution yet. I think what we need to make a greater effort to understand the problem and find a solution through pacific means. If we don't solve this, then the preservation of the natural resource base and the fight against climate change, I believe, will have very limited results. So we need to address the problem. I don't think we have a solution yet. We need to work on it, and strong governance and listening to people. I think we need to get in touch with people. It is amazing when we started to go to those places that are very unsafe and listen to people and what their problems are is fundamental to address the problem. This is not going to come from a top-down solution. We need to involve the local communities and strengthen their governance.
Thank you. Javier, to you, in 1 minute, what message would you have to those attending COP26?
Well, I think is that realize that agricultural producers and workers are a key part of the solution. And they need support, a real support, not only empty words. We need real support, especially related to more access to climate finance and a better distribution of this access to finance. Since when we improve the financing of producers, we will break this vicious circle and everything will start to be better. So let's realize that workers are key part of the solution and put in the correct perspective, not only empty words.
Thank you. And Andrew, to you.
Well, I hope people do not even attend COP unless they're actually serious about making a difference. I attended Madrid COP a couple of years ago, and I've not really seen that much significant change since then. I don't want to sort of repeat what Greta says, but there's far too much talk and not enough action. I think the people who are rather than attending COP, maybe people should be talking to their own communities and sort of seeing what it is that they need to have changed. Like one of the key issues with UNHCR is that when people apply for refugee status, we ask, what are the reasons why you left? And it's complex. It's all interwoven. If it's violence, it becomes, that's the end result, but everything is becoming much more complicated. So rather than talking, why don't people start talking to the communities and find out what are the results, what are the actions that those communities need? Thank you.
Thank you. And Deissy, final remarks for you, your message to those at COP.
Yeah, I will bring 3 words. One is listen, the other one collaborate, and the other one act. We need to listen to all the people on the ground, young people, the people that know what are the challenges, the rural communities that are working day to day in dealing with this type of issues, and we need to listen carefully. We also need to collaborate between each other. Stop acting in silos and just putting our own perspectives, but really to collaborate with each other and try to think in a holistic manner in each of one of the interventions that we do. The other one is act, and we need to really do something and just stop talking and just saying words and commitments, but actually start acting and doing what we need to do in order to transform and to close the gap of innovation that we already have in the agricultural system. So that would be my message.
Well, that concludes our webinar today. I'm going to turn the camera and microphone over to Bram Govaerts for some concluding remarks. Thank you all for your participation. Today's conversation will be published as an episode of the Global Dispatches podcast. You can access that on anywhere you can find podcasts, and I look forward to seeing you again at a future webinar. Over to you, Bram.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thanks to the one and only Mark Leon Goldberg for moderating this very complex discussion. Big thank you to Andrew, Deissy, Javier, and our ex-CIMMYT board member, Salvador. Your insights have been very helpful. I've been taking very, very detailed notes. And then a couple of highlights. I think we all remember when we heard the phrase that when people move, it is because they have no other alternative than to move, and climate change is forcing them. And this inspires us to look at stabilized livelihoods with more income, but especially to focus on how we can fix those agri-food systems that are already broken in the region. But also, let's look at those systems that today in this region are providing actually environmental services like biodiversity, are providing nutrition globally, and let's avoid that those systems also break, because that would have a devastating impact all over the world. It's very clear that farmers are part of the solution. And in that solution, you need to look at the environment and the livelihood, but also at the full value chain, evaluating how can we add value to nutrition, to those environmental services, and in the end, to peace building. Is there a mechanism where we can break what is today the same grain of maize, the same value is given to a grain of maize produced with unsustainable practices, produced in a way that disrupts the systems, produced in a way that displaces people? How can we give additional value to a maize grain that is produced by corrupt cooperatives with diversification strategies, with farmers at the center creating a solution for climate change? Science, for sure, data science, system science, thinking science will be at the heart of coming to this solution. Let this be a call for a different way of doing science that puts and breaks the vicious circle, and that immediately connects to scale through innovation networks. I think this seminar has highlighted that change is needed right now. Let us not be mistaken. This is one of the biggest threats we ever have dealt with as humankind. And we will be held accountable, all of us here today, for the decisions we take the coming future. We will need to move from response to transformation. And it's exactly there where the science of the CGIAR sits and can act together and allow for the needed information exactly for that transformation. At CIMMYT, we are committed to contribute to address food security and climate adaptation challenges together with food producers and consumers globally. In fact, we are already working with the government of Mexico on integrated projects called Crops for Mexico that has been the basis for the regional integrated initiatives that Deissy mentioned. And very clearly, Salvador offered that the lessons learned from all those efforts in Mexico can be offered to the rest of the region. We will certainly use the compelling arguments voiced in this webinar to seek more partners and secure additional funding to help respond to the climate security crisis in the Central America's dry corridor. Because we need decoupled action, and we need to activate our response capacity on the ground with excellence in science and excellence in response operations. Anything that does not respond, anything that does not contribute to the shift that we need should be forcefully abandoned. And if we have a card to play, a card that can support this transformation, we will have to play it hard and play it now. Like Deissy said, let's listen, collaborate, and act. Let's get to action together now. We can keep looking around who's gonna do it. Surprise, nobody else is gonna come around. It's gonna be us all together who has to take the needed action. All the rest can simply wait. Thank you very much.